The sound reached me before I saw him. A weak, rasping cry that seemed out of place in the dilapidated apartment building. I'd been called here as part of my job with the city's animal welfare department, responding to a neighbor's concerned call about strange noises coming from a recently abandoned unit. The landlord had reluctantly let me in, muttering about tenants who'd disappeared in the night, 3 months behind on rent. They left some junk behind, he'd said, swinging the door open. Dealing with it next week. Just check there's no cats or whatever making the noise and get out. The apartment was a study in neglect. Stained carpets, garbage overflowing from a plastic bin in the kitchen, the musty smell of a space that had been closed up for too long. But cutting through it all was another scent. Acrid, distinctive, and unmistakable to anyone who'd ever worked with birds. I followed the smell to a back bedroom, where heavy curtains blocked out most of the light. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I saw him. A gray shape huddled at the bottom of a rusted cage, barely big enough for him to turn around in. An African gray parrot, once majestic with its slate-colored feathers and vibrant red tail. Now a shadow of what such a bird should be. He was on the floor of the cage, wings held at odd angles, his feathers broken and dull. The bottom of the cage was thick with waste and rotting food. A plastic water dish lay on its side, bone dry. How long had he been here, abandoned in the darkness? As I approached, he lifted his head with visible effort, fixing me with an eye that still held a glimmer of intelligence despite his condition. Then he spoke, his voice raspy from dehydration, but unmistakably clear. Hello. Something broke open inside me. A surge of anger and compassion so powerful it nearly took my breath away. African greys are among the most intelligent birds on the planet, with cognitive abilities comparable to a human child. They're deeply social creatures that form strong bonds and can live for decades. Yet here was this magnificent being, left to die alone in a darkened room. Hey there, I said softly, crouching beside the cage. I'm going to get you out of here, okay? The bird blinked slowly, as if processing my words. Then, with what seemed like enormous effort, he repeated, okay. The next hours were a blur of urgent activity. I called my supervisor, explained the situation, and received emergency authorization to remove the bird. The landlord, to his credit, was horrified when he saw the condition of the parrot and immediately signed the release forms. I had no idea. He kept saying, they told me they didn't have pets. I would never have. I barely heard him, focused entirely on the fragile life before me. Getting the parrot out of the apartment was just the first step. He needed specialized care, and quickly. In my car, I carefully placed the cage on the passenger seat, securing it with the seatbelt. The bird watched me with that same intelligent gaze, tracking my movements. Despite his condition, there was something dignified about him, a presence that transcended his broken body. Hang in there, I told him as I drove, perhaps too fast, toward the exotic bird sanctuary on the outskirts of the city. Just a little longer. From the cage came a soft sound. Not a word this time, but a gentle warble. It was the first natural bird sound I'd heard from him, and somehow it felt like a promise. Dr. Eliza Chen met me at the door of the sanctuary, alerted by my urgent call. A petite woman with calm eyes and quick hands, she'd been working with parrots for 20 years. She took one look at the bird and her expression darkened. Let's get him to the exam room, she said simply. Under the bright lights of the medical area, the full extent of the parrot's condition became clear. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, broken feathers from stress picking, what Dr. Chen called cage trauma to his wings and feet from being confined in too small a space, and a respiratory infection that had likely developed from the unsanitary conditions. How long do you think he was alone there? I asked, watching as she gently administered fluids. At least 2 weeks, possibly longer, she replied. African greys are surprisingly hardy, but he's in rough shape. Another few days and we would have been too late. Another few days. The thought made me sick. If that neighbor hadn't reported the noise, if I'd been assigned to a different call that day, will he make it? I forced myself to ask the question. Dr. Chen didn't answer immediately, focused on inserting a tiny IV line into the parrot's wing. When she looked up, her expression was guarded but not hopeless. The next 48 hours are critical, she said. But he's still responsive. still aware. That's a good sign. She paused, studying the bird. He's a fighter, and he has something to live for. What's that? Connection, she said simply. You heard him speak. He's reaching out. That's powerful. As if on cue, the parrot's eyes fluttered open. He looked directly at me and said, clear as day, "Hello, friend." Dr. Chen smiled. See? He's still in there. I hadn't planned to get involved beyond the rescue. My job was to respond to reports of animal neglect or abuse, remove animals from dangerous situations, and then move on to the next case. There were always more calls, more animals in need. But I found myself returning to the sanctuary the next day, and the day after that. I learned that the parrot had been named Solomon by the sanctuary staff, a name that seemed to fit his grave demeanor and ancient eyes. Solomon's recovery was slow but steady. The respiratory infection responded to antibiotics. The rehydration therapy brought back some of his energy. Proper nutrition began to improve his feather condition, though Dr. Chen explained it would take a full molt cycle before he would look truly healthy again. What fascinated me most was watching his personality emerge as he healed. African greys are known for their intelligence and their ability to mimic human speech, often with remarkable context. But Solomon wasn't just mimicking, he was communicating. "Bad cage," he would say sometimes, looking at the spacious rehabilitation enclosure that had replaced his rusted prison. "Good cage." "Hello, friend," he greeted me each time I visited, followed by a soft whistle that I came to recognize as his particular sound for me. 2 weeks into his recovery, I arrived to find Dr. Chen smiling as she observed Solomon through the mesh of his enclosure. "He's been asking for you," she said. "Asking?" In response, she played a recording on her phone. Solomon's voice, clearer now with treatment, repeatedly saying, "Where, friend?" "Want friend." Something warm and fierce expanded in my chest. I'd tried to maintain professional distance. I'd seen too many cases of neglect and abuse to let myself get attached to every animal I rescued. But Solomon was different. There was a person in there, behind those intelligent eyes. Not a human person, but a being with awareness, with emotions, with needs beyond the merely physical. "He's going to need a permanent home," Dr. Chen said casually, watching my face. "Once he's fully recovered. A home with someone who understands parrots, especially African greys. They're not easy birds. They need mental stimulation, consistent interaction, proper diet. They can live for decades. It's a big commitment." I recognized what she was doing, and part of me wanted to back away. My small apartment, my irregular work hours, my complete lack of experience with birds. It wasn't an ideal situation. But then Solomon caught sight of me and let out a joyful whistle. "Friend, come." "Hello, friend." And I knew with absolute certainty that my life had just changed course. The next 3 months were a crash course in parrot care. I read every book I could find on African greys, joined online forums for bird owners, and spent hours at the sanctuary learning from Dr. Chen and her staff. I converted my spare bedroom into a bird room, complete with a large cage, play stands, and bird-safe plants. I rearranged my work schedule to ensure Solomon would never be alone for too long. And I visited him every day at the sanctuary, watching his transformation with a sense of wonder. His feathers grew in stronger, the dull gray replaced by a rich, almost silvery sheen. His red tail feathers became vibrant again. He gained weight, his movements became more coordinated, and his vocabulary expanded rapidly. Dr. Chen explained that while some of his speech was likely carried over from his previous life, he was also learning new words at an impressive rate. He learned my name, the names of the sanctuary staff, and began to use simple phrases appropriately. "James come today?" he would ask in the mornings, looking toward the door. "Yes, Solomon, James is coming," a staff member would reply. And when I arrived, "James here." "Good day." But it wasn't just speech. Solomon learned to play again. Something Dr. Chen said was a crucial sign of psychological healing in parrots. He manipulated puzzle toys, shredded paper with obvious enjoyment, and even began to play simple games with me, dropping toys for me to retrieve in a parrot version of fetch. The day Dr. Chen finally cleared him for adoption, I felt a mix of elation and terror. This intelligent, complex being was going to depend on me for his physical and emotional well-being for potentially the next 50 years. It was a responsibility that went far beyond pet ownership. It was a partnership, a commitment to honor the trust of a creature who had already been profoundly betrayed by humans. "Are you sure about this?" Dr. Chen asked as we completed the paperwork. "It's not too late to change your mind." Solomon was perched on a stand nearby, watching the proceedings with interest. As if sensing the importance of the moment, he fluffed his feathers, stretched his wings, fully extended now, a beautiful sight, and said clearly, "Solomon ready." "James ready?" I looked at him. This bird who had been through so much and yet still found the capacity to trust, to connect, to hope for something better. And I knew there was only one possible answer. "Yes," I said, to both Dr. Chen and Solomon. "I'm ready." Bringing Solomon home was nothing like I'd imagined. Despite all my preparation, all my research, I wasn't prepared for the reality of living with a being who observed everything with such intelligence, who reacted to my moods, who had opinions about everything from the music I played to the color of shirt I wore. The first few days were an adjustment for both of us. Solomon was hesitant in his new environment, staying close to his cage even when the door was open. I respected his need for security, talking to him constantly but never forcing interaction. On the third night, I was sitting on the couch reading when I heard a soft flutter of wings. Solomon landed on the back of the couch just behind my shoulder. He was silent for a long moment, then gently preened a strand of my hair. "James good," he said softly. "Home good." It was the first time he'd used that word. Home. Something about it, about the way he said it, made my eyes burn with sudden tears. "Yes, Solomon," I managed to say. "Home is good." The months that followed were a journey of discovery for both of us. I learned Solomon's rhythms, his morning exuberance, his afternoon nap time, his twilight chattiness. He learned my habits too, seeming to understand my work schedule and greeting me with special enthusiasm on my days off. His physical recovery continued at home. His final broken feathers molted out, replaced by perfect new ones. His muscle tone improved with daily flight time in the bird-proofed living room. Dr. Chen, who made house calls to check on him, pronounced him a miracle of resilience. But the most remarkable transformation was in his spirit. The solemn, traumatized bird I'd found in that dark apartment blossomed into a creature of surprising humor and complexity. He developed a fondness for hiding objects. My keys, pens, even my glasses would disappear, only to be found in unlikely places. He learned to mimic the microwave beep so perfectly that I'd check the kitchen multiple times before realizing I'd been pranked. And he began to create his own phrases, combining words in ways that revealed genuine understanding. When I was running late for work, "James, hurry! Clock says go." When I was sad after a difficult day, "No tears. Solomon here." When he wanted attention, "Time for friend now." Work later. There were challenges too. Days when Solomon screamed for reasons I couldn't discern. Nights when he had what I could only describe as nightmares, thrashing in his sleep and waking with a frantic "bad cage, bad cage." Times when he'd pluck a feather despite all the enrichment and attention I provided. On those days, I remembered what Dr. Chen had told me. He'll never completely forget what happened to him. Trauma leaves marks, but he can still have a full, joyful life. It's not about erasing the past. It's about building a future with more good days than bad. 1 year after the rescue, we celebrated what we had decided to call Solomon's Homecoming Day. I decorated his playstand with bird-safe streamers and prepared a special treat of his favorite fruits. As I watched him explore the festivities, calling out, "Party, Solomon, party!" In obvious delight, I reflected on how far we'd both come. The broken bird in the rusted cage was now a vibrant, complex companion who had changed my life as much as I'd changed his. My apartment was louder, messier, filled with toys and perches and the constant chatter of a being who had opinions about everything. My schedule revolved around another creature's needs. My vacuum cleaner worked overtime to deal with the constant shower of feather dust and food bits, and I wouldn't have changed a thing. That evening, as Solomon settled on his favorite perch near the window to watch the sunset, a daily ritual for him, he turned to look at me with those intelligent eyes that had first captured my heart. "Solomon and James," he said clearly, Good flock? I smiled, feeling the truth of his simple statement deep in my soul. We were a flock of two, brought together by circumstance, but bound now by something much stronger. Mutual rescue, mutual healing, mutual love. Yes, Solomon, I replied. The best flock. He preened his magnificent wings, now whole and strong, no longer broken. Not erased of scars, but healed. Not unchanged by the past, but undefeated by it. In saving him, I had discovered something profound about the resilience of the spirit, both his and my own. And in his recovery, I had found a most unexpected truth, that sometimes when we reach out to rescue another being, we end up being rescued ourselves.